In this video, we will discuss how written language is related to oral language. In the minds of many, it may be thought that language is one thing we all have and it has two parts, like it has a spoken language part and a written language part as two essentially equivalent forms of our language. You might also think that language is composed of two different ways to access meaning, one being via speech, where you listen to words, and the other being via print, where you read words. But again, language is one thing that just have two different entrances. This is not the right way to think about language or about the relationship between these two parts. Indeed, from a linguistic point of view, language only includes the spoken language form. So oral language is your language. And language includes the forms and the meanings and their connection. Onto this oral language comes to be attached the written language form, which is not a language itself. It's not equivalent or parallel to any of these parts, but instead is a way to access the spoken language forms. So this is how you should think about how written language comes after spoken language has already been established and maps to this aspect, the language forms. So to how words sound rather than to what words mean. So written language must be thought of as a way to visually represent spoken language. And indeed, it is a systematic representation of language elements. So some pieces of spoken language are systematically represented visually. Which pieces are that? There are different answers for different languages, actually for different orthographic systems, but let us look at one example from Norwegian. This is one sentence, a simple sentence. I did not really choose it in any particular way. I took it from the webpage of ESP. And here we can look at how some of these symbols function in this written language example. So what are they representing? In the case of the letter L, we see that it simply represents the sound U. Indeed, most letters here represent speech sounds in a relatively straightforward way. So this is a very common function in an orthographic system like the Norwegian. However, it is not so simple because there are cases like this letter, which in one case here corresponds to the speech sound O, and another one corresponds to the speech sound U. And you can't tell which one it is by looking at the letters next to it. You have to know these words to know which option is correct. There are also other kinds of symbols, like this one, which can be used to signify grammatical boundaries or prosodic boundaries, so to separate phrases or to induce you to pause when you speak, or functions of that sort. Letters can also be complicated in other ways. For example, here, the two identical letters do not signify a different consonant. It's still G, as it would be even if there were a single letter. Instead, the fact that there are two instances of this letter signifies that this vowel should be short instead of long. This is a very challenging aspect of the Norwegian orthography because you have one feature of some letter represent another feature of another sound signified by a different letter. There are more complications. So this letter combination here does not precisely signify sound. Indeed, the T is not pronounced. Instead, this signifies a grammatical element, specifically that this is the definite form of the noun. It is the child we're talking about. It's not a child. Finally, some letters do not have a function to represent sounds at all, but only serve to distinguish visually among words with the same pronunciation. So these are called silent letters and only serve an orthographic, a visual kind of function. So as you can see, although we can still say that the function of the written elements are to represent spoken elements, what is represented and how it is represented can be complex in some cases and in some ways. To go back to our general definition, written language indeed is a visual representation of spoken language and a systematic representation of language elements with a variety of complications. In a language like Norwegian and the European languages more generally, which use alphabetic writing systems, the language elements that are represented are speech sounds, otherwise known as phonemes. But there are other things that can also be represented. Different writing systems may represent different elements. There are languages that represent entire syllables or entire morphemes or different combinations or different ways the consonants and consonant vowel combinations are expressed. And in every language, there is a balance between the kinds of elements that are represented, mostly between representing speech sounds and morphological elements, that is, word parts with specific meanings that are represented, but additional elements like grammatical and phrase and prosodic elements can also be represented. So this general statement that written language is a systematic representation of language elements is correct, but is accompanied by a range of complexities that vary between different writing systems.